Welcome to the Our Dad Stamps YouTube channel. My name's Pete West, and like a lot of people my age, I started collecting stamps as a child, encouraged by my father, who was an avid collector. 20 years ago I inherited his collection, and at the same time I also inherited my wife's dad's collection. Since then I've been buying and selling stamps through my online stores at Delcamp and eBay under the name Our Dad Stamps. And this has allowed me to grow the collection into what you see behind me. With these videos, I want to share some stories and information that I've learnt about stamps and stamp collecting. I hope you enjoy them, and if you do, don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe to get regular updates on new content. Hello again from Our Dad Stamps video podcast. My name's Pete.
And I'm Sheila, and what are we talking about today, Pete?
Hello Sheila. Well, today we're going to talk about how to value your stamps. Now the obvious answer is to look in the catalogue to see what the catalogue value is, but it's not necessarily as easy as that. I liken it to a bit like buying a car, or selling a car should I say. When you're trying to sell your car, you could look into a catalogue in England called Glass's Guide, or any one of the many apps that will give you a price of your car. But if your car's full of scratches and full of dents, or the engine only firing on 3 cylinders, it's not going to be worth the same as if it's in good condition. And the same thing applies to stamps. So what we're going to be looking at today is what to look out for in stamps, what sort of things will make the stamp value less than the catalogue value. It's important to note that when you're looking at a catalogue value, that is actually the price that people like Stanley Gibbons or Scott's or Michelle will sell the stamp to you at. It's not necessarily what you will get if you sold it back to them. And they only sell stamps in perfect condition. So that's what we're looking at in terms of catalogue value. The first thing to look for is obvious things that are wrong with the stamp. Is there a tear in it? Is there a piece missing out the corner? Or, as on the example I've put up on the screen, has the colour been almost completely washed out? So just a general look will tell you whether it's a good stamp or whether it's a bad stamp. The 3 stamps there, the one on the left it's a nice colour, it's got a nice postmark on it, and that is what you would hope for. As I said, the one in the middle is very, very faded, and the one on the right you can see has a big chunk missing out of it.
So can I just ask a question? You're talking now about looking at the stamp in the catalogue. Let's imagine you're out at a stamp fair, or you're out at a market or something, and someone is selling stamps. Is there any way that you can you look at Stanley Gibbons online to find that stamp and do a little bit of homework while you're at that stamp fair or while you're at that market?
Yes, indeed. There are lots of online catalogues that you can look at to give you a general idea. Where it won't work so well is if you're looking at a slight variety, or one that has several different watermarks or different shades. It won't necessarily tell you that, but it will give you a basic price of the stamp. Yeah.
Because if we backtrack a bit, if you're looking at your stamp in the catalogue, you've already bought that stamp. But I'm just thinking, when you are out and about at antique fairs or stamp fairs, or, antique shops, for example, and you want to, okay, there's some stamps here, I need a little bit more information. So you can download something onto your phone? Yes,
you can. I must admit I haven't got any downloaded, but it's possible. Stanley Gibbons has the basic catalogue, and is developing more and more of their specialised catalogues. I know Scott's has an online catalogue. I'm not sure about the others. But the other thing, if you are in a dealer's, then a good dealer will tell you the catalogue price, will let you have a look at their catalogue. So it's relatively easy to get a price on it. And of course, if you're spending a lot of money, I'll do a bit of research first and afterwards and have an idea what you're after.
Because I think there's 2 ways of looking at this. There can be you are an established stamp collector and you come across a stamp and you think, oh yeah, I know I need that for my collection. You know a little bit about the stamp and you can probably make a good educated decision whether that stamp is in good condition, But if you're just out and about in general and you come across like an outdoor market, there's pages of books or just a box of loose stamps, can you sort of have a look and then maybe go away and have a cup of tea and then look at a catalogue online that will
certainly give you an idea of what sort of value it is. Yeah, they are around, so it's much easier now than it was 50 years ago. So once you've got the basics and decided that the stamp looks okay, there's several other things that will affect the value of the stamp, and I'm going to go through a few, not in any particular order. Each and every one of these will diminish or add to the value of the stamp depending on how it looks. So it's important you get an overview of everything, not just take one thing into account. The first thing we're going to look at is hinged stamps. Now this really applies to mint stamps, that is, stamps that have never been used for posting. So they should still have some gum on the back. And depending on how the hinges have been applied will affect the value because it will affect the look of the gum on the back of the stamp. You can get various types. It's accepted generally that before the end of the Second World War, everybody stuck their stamps in using hinges. So all stamps will have a hinge mark on the back. And the Stanley Gibbons catalogue price is based on it having a light hinge mark on the back of the stamp. After the war, people got wary and started using stock books and mounts that didn't need hinges. And so the value of stamps, certainly in Stanley Gibbons catalogues anyway, the value of stamps are for unmounted mint stamps. And so on that basis, if you've got a pre-war stamp that's never been mounted, it's actually probably going to be worth slightly more than the catalogue value because they're not usual to come across. But once again, we've got a few examples to show you where, in the first example, there's just a horrible mess on the back of the stamp and it's been hinged. It looks like something else has been glued onto it. And it really, although the front of the stamp looks fine, the back of the stamp will detract from the value of this. The condition of the back of the stamp will detract from the value. So it's important to look at the back of the stamp as well. And I've put a few examples. Another stamp, although it's only got one hinge mark on it, if you look closely next to the hinge, there's a little white mark, which is actually what's called a thin. And this is where a hinge has been stuck on the back of the stamp, and when the hinge has been removed, it's taken part of the paper with it. And once again, anything with a thin on it will be worth a lot less than if it's in perfect condition. And the final one in this group, it looks nice, there's no marks or anything, but it's actually got no gum on it either. So somebody very possibly, and this does happen, that the hinge got so badly on the back of the stamp, there really is no gum left on it. So by soaking it to take the hinges off, you also soak all the gum off. And once again, a mint stamp with no gum on it is going to be worth a lot less than a properly minted stamp.
Can I just ask a question then? If you are saving stamps and you buy stamps and they've got that little hinge thing on the back and you want to take that off because you want to put it in your book, how do you get that off the back?
Very carefully is the answer. If it's a mint stamp, then you really want to have, they will come off with water very easily. If it's a used stamp, you just, even with a paintbrush, paint a little bit of water on the back and it will lift off easily. But you don't want to do that with a mint stamp because it will also take the gum off. Modern hinges are much better than older hinges in that they do come away quite easily. But some of the older hinges, and also on the older stamps where the paper is more fragile, you have to be very careful that you don't take away a bit of the stamp when you're taking them off. And it's probably safer to leave the bit that's gummed on the stamp and just tear the rest of it off. Otherwise you run the risk of damaging the stamp.
So there's no holding the stamp in a pair of tweezers over a boiling kettle?
That works as well. but once again it disturbs the gum, and if you're very, very careful, you can remove the hinge and leave the gum intact, but you get what the experts call disturbed gum, and it does show that it's not exactly the same as it was when it was laid in the paper. And once again, it won't really make a lot of difference to a 50p stamp. It's not going to make any difference to the value of it. But if you're talking about a £5,000 stamp, then one where the gum's disturbed is going to be worth less than one where the gum is intact.
So I wonder what Stanley Gibbons do when they source all their stamps. They've obviously got some kind of method as to getting hinges off that they've acquired stamps and they're going to sell in their shop.
Don't believe they do. I think they sell their stamps as they buy them. I don't think they do anything to them to improve or make them worse. I believe when they buy stuff in, they will just process it, sort them and sell them as is.
Well, I think we should actually ask that question to Stanley Gibbons when we go to the shop in London.
Yeah, we can do.
We'll put it on our list to ask them.
Okay, the next thing to look out. So you've got a stamp that's got a light hinge mark on it or no hinge mark at all, which means it's going to be worth more than the bad ones. Another thing you come across with mint stamps is something called toning. Now, toning occurs more often in hot countries than it does in cooler climates, but it's the effect of the heat on the gum, and it turns the gum brown, and varying shades of brown can occur. Some can be completely brown, and if it's really what's called heavily toned, in other words, the back of the stamp looks like it's on brown paper, it's probably worth nothing at all. There are people who won't have toned stamps in their collection anywhere because there's a belief that it's caused by spores of bacteria, and they can spread it to other stamps. It's never been proved. Some people believe that, some people don't believe that, but it's something to avoid. Toned stamps are something to avoid. However, there are certain stamps, certain rare stamps, that you can only find toned. There are none in existence that aren't toned, so it's impossible to avoid it altogether. But if possible, avoid anything where the gum looks brown, unless the catalogue says this stamp has used brown gum or is prone to toning.
So proceed with caution.
Exactly, as always. Another thing that can happen with the gum is something called foxing or rust spots, and this is where usually around the edges of the stamp you get what looks like rust, and it's little brown spots that come, and it's exactly the same as the toning. It's caused by heat and hot, humid conditions, and again it can affect, well, it certainly does affect the value of the stamp if you've got it with some heavy foxing, and sometimes it also shows through from the front as well, and if that happens then it really isn't an attractive stamp. You can get liquid to remove it, which I have done on a couple of stamps that I haven't been able to get any other way, and it does work very well. The thing is, it uses a certain amount of bleach, so it bleaches the stamp, and you have to be careful not to bleach the colour out of the stamp, but also you can see where the foxing was because it's white as opposed to gum coloured. So whilst it is a solution, it's not the perfect answer, and once again, even if you've cleaned all the foxing off, it will still be worth less than the perfect stamp. Another thing to look for is just on general discoloration of the stamp. If a stamp's been sat out in the sun for a while, the colour can fade away and change. Again, if it's been in hot, humid conditions, not only can the back change colour, but the front can change colour as well and look slightly browny paper or yellowy paper. In addition to that, a lot of the Edward VII, George V stamps were made from what they called, and Victorian stamps were made from what they called fugitive ink, and it was to prevent people trying to remove the cancellation on the stamp. And what happened is if you put them in any form of liquid, the colour would wash away. So once again, if the colour is not bright and clear, then it's going to detract from the value of the stamp. And as you can see in the two I've got, one stamp looks slightly brown and is a faded pink. The other one is quite clear and crisp. So look out for discoloration or colour fading, because it will affect the stamp. Okay, moving on from that one, you need to look for a stamp that is well centred, where the actual bit of the stamp is right in the middle and there's a nice border all around the outside. Particularly so on imperfect stamps, where the postmistress or postmaster had to cut the stamp out physically with a pair of scissors, and often they weren't particularly careful at doing it. And the ideal stamp will have a border the same size all the way around the outside of the stamp. But this also happens with perforated stamps. If the perforation machine hasn't been lined up correctly, you can have it where the edge of the stamp is right alongside the perforation, so there's a big border on one side and next to no border on the other side. Of course, if it's been misaligned really badly and you get perforation down the middle of the stamp, that's going to add to the value. But we're talking about normal stamps here, and you want one that has, as I said, an equal border all the way round. In some cases, that's actually a rarity to get stamps. Some of the older stamps where the perforation machines weren't as good as they are now, it can be rare to find a stamp perfectly centred. In which case, if you've got one, it will be worth more than a normal stamp, more than the catalogue value. But again, it will describe this somewhere in the catalogue to say that this particular stamp isn't normally centred. And whilst we're on the subject of margin borders around the outside of the stamp, this applies to imperforate stamps, or stamps where it is possible to get an imperforated stamp. If you've got one where there is no border around the outside whatsoever, then be wary. The stamp I'm showing now is from New Zealand, and this was produced initially imperforate. As an imperforate stamp, it is catalogued at over £300. However, later they did the same stamp and used a variety of perforations. And the perforated version, or one of the perforated versions, is only worth £20. So you've got a variation of £320. Now, this particular stamp that is on the screen, I suggest was actually a perforated stamp, whereas someone has gone around carefully cutting it with the scissors, because there are no visible borders around there at all. And as such, I wouldn't take that as the imperforate stamp. I would take that as the perforated variety that's been damaged, and so basically it is worthless. In stamps like this, you need a border around the outside to prove that it is a proper imperforate stamp, not a normal stamp that someone's cut around the edges. In something like a penny black, then they were only ever produced imperforate. So one like this, a penny black with no borders around the outside, is still a penny black and is still worth a small amount of money, but it's not worth the big amounts of money that a normal penny black would be worth. So, as I said, one thing definitely to look out for is to make sure that your stamp has got nice even borders all the way around the outside. The other thing to look for with perforations is all the teeth of the perforation should be there. This sounds a petty thing, a minor thing, but when you separate stamps, if one of the teeth comes away, that actually devalues the stamp. And even just one tooth being pulled, what they call pulled perforations, if just one tooth has been shortened, then that stamp isn't going to be worth as much as one where all the perforations are good. Once again though, there are exceptions. A lot of the what are called coil stamps. A coil stamp is a stamp that was produced for a machine. In the old days, there was stamp machines in post offices where you could put your penny or tuppence in, and out would come a stamp, and you'd just tear off the perforations. And often they were imperforate on one side and perforated on the other side, where you tore them off. But to make these stronger, they were they use quite wide perforations, sometimes as much as just a perforation of 8. And they do tend to pull the perforations off. So some stamps are acceptable with pulled perfs, but most of them you need to watch out, and you need to make sure all the perforations look nice and are intact, particularly on the corners. The corners are the easiest place to damage, and if you have one where there's a corner cut off, what's known as a blunt corner or a short corner, then once again, it may not affect the value of the stamp a lot, but it will affect the value of the stamp to a certain extent. A couple more things to look for. One is the cancellation. Early post offices were instructed, they were actually called obliterators, and the postmaster or postmistress was instructed to completely obliterate the stamp. Now, if you've got a stamp where you really can't see what the stamp is because the postmark is covering it, it's not as attractive as one where you can. And stamp collectors like to have stamps where you can see what the stamp looks like, but also see that it has been cancelled. So heavy postmarks is something to watch out for. And as I said, if it's really difficult to see what the stamp is, then it's going to really detract from the value of the stamp. Okay, once again, I've got several examples up on the screen, and the first one from this set, as you can see, is exactly what I described. You really can't see what the stamp looks like. It is in fact the same as the two stamps alongside it, the 2 Anna Indian Victorian stamp, but it's been so heavily cancelled you can't see what it is. Something else to look for is the one next to it, which has Something Brothers printed across the top. That is a company stamp, and once again that would be worth less because it has been defaced, if you like, by a company putting their own mark on the stamp. Although the bit on the left, it may have been through the postage system, the chances are it was used just as a receipt on something, so try to avoid those. And the third one in this little group as well, it's got a few black blobs in the top right hand corner. You have no idea what these are. These could have been applied at any point. It doesn't look particularly like a postmark to me. It's certainly not clear whether it's a postmark. So that is a possibility that that's been a forged postmark. It is a possibility that it is a fiscal postmark. In other words, it's been used as a receipt for something. And again, that's worth a lot less. So the sort of things you should be looking for is the two along the bottom. The first one, where you can see the whole circular postmark with the date and the place it was posted in clearly on the stamp, and these are quite sought after. In America they're known as socked on the nose stamps, where the postmark goes right in the middle of the stamp, but some people like them this way. Others prefer the green one on the right, where you can see it's a proper circular date stamp and you can see it's been properly put through the postage system, but you can also clearly see what the stamp looks like. Out of those two, the choice is yours, but both of them are more attractive than the three above. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the rarity value of the stamp. Now, we've talked about all these things detracting from the stamp and making it worth less. And as a rough rule of thumb, unless you've got an absolutely perfect stamp, you're going to be looking at least 50% off the catalogue value. If it's got a heavy postmark, if it's got a bit of discoloration, if it's been heavily hinged, if it's not centred, any of those things will take money off the value of the stamp. And as I said, at least 50%, possibly more than that. But if the stamp is a really rare stamp, those figures don't necessarily apply. And you can have very rare stamps that have actually torn that are still worth thousands of pounds. So whilst these things I've been through are a rough guide and will help you decide whether the stamp is worth what the catalogue says it's worth or worth a bit less, it does depend entirely on the stamp. And as I said, some stamps are worth, because of their rarity value, are going to have less of a detraction from something being wrong with it than other stamps. And basically, the more common the stamp, the cheaper the value of the stamp, the more you're going to knock off the value of it by having something wrong with it. Anything under £10, if it's torn, probably isn't worth having it, the stamp, to be honest. If it's got a piece missing at the corner of the stamp, it probably isn't worth having for a stamp under £10. However, for a stamp valued at £300, if it's got a small tear in it, if it's got a small piece missing, then it's going to be worth something. Obviously not anywhere near as much as it is at full catalogue value, but certainly it's going to be worth something. So it's something to look out for. Okay, well, I hope that's helped. As I said, when you're valuing your stamps, don't take the catalogue value as what it's worth. It rarely is. I would suggest you're probably looking 25 on an average collection, somewhere between 25 to 30% of the catalogue value. I tried to sell some stamps recently. I tried to sell an album of stamps recently and was quoted between 5 and 10% of the catalogue value. And I thought they were decent stamps. So certainly, 25-30% is a generous valuation.
Can I just add, I've actually just been having a quick look around on the Stanley Gibbons website, and yes, they have got digital versions available to be used on your mobile phone. Obviously they're all priced individually, but just one that I picked up on here, 2022 Commonwealth and British Empire stamp catalogue from 1840 through to 1970, and the stamp on the front of the catalogue and on the front screen is the stamp that you've got a portion of.
Is it? The 1 cent magenta?
It is a 1 cent magenta.
All right, yeah. I need to get that catalogue. My catalogues, I generally replace my catalogues every 2 years, and it needs replacing. So,
well, just to give you an idea, the digital catalogue this is priced in euros, is €74.77. And there is actually on their website a little section, view a video tutorial of our digital catalogues here. So maybe your listeners would like to have a look at that and just see if that's of any use to them.
I can put a link to that in the notes at the bottom of this, if anybody wants to have a look. I have used Stanley Gibbons digital catalogues, and they are good for basic stuff, but I'm old-fashioned and prefer having an album and find it easier to search for something by turning pages, physical pages, than I do by scrolling. So, but it's certainly something for the future, I think.
And I'm just looking through, they actually give you some sample pages so you can see the quality, because
it does look very much like the physical catalogue. The sample pages look,
and I guess if it's on your mobile, you can actually pinch it out to make it as big as you want.
I presume so, yeah.
Because I'm just thinking a lot of people who are stamp collectors will be out and about hoping to come across that £1 million stamp in a junk shop or in a shoebox.
We all find one every day.
Absolutely. But this would be probably a good way for you to have that information at your fingertips so that you could make a decision on whether you should buy that stamp.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And of course, as I've said before on previous podcasts, video podcasts, there are free versions available on the internet. Maybe not quite in as much detail as Stanley Gibbons, but as a rough guide, that can help as well. Okay, well, thank you for listening. I hope you found that useful, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time on another edition of Our Dad Stamps podcast.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Our Dad Stamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Our Dad Stamps podcast.